You know, there's a lot of things that get overlooked when people talk about vacation planning, and it's often the small things, the little things that people don't think are worth talking about that can really bite you in the butt. So today I want to talk about something that I don't hear enough people talking about, and I do think that it's worth taking some time to discuss. So grab yourself a snack, get comfortable, and join me here at Universal Studios Florida while we talk about the things that you need to know when navigating between Walt Disney World and Universal. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to, like I said, Universal Studios Florida. It's an absolutely gorgeous day and I'm so glad to be here because it's been way too long. But anyway, we're gonna save adventuring around the park for another day. Today, I want to focus some attention here because especially with Epic Universe right around the corner, I know a lot of people are thinking about adding that to their Disney vacations, or you know, they're going to be visiting Epic Universe and the Universal Orlando Resort. Maybe want to dabble for a couple days over at Walt Disney World. And as is always the case when you're planning a vacation like that, there are some things that you need to know. And so we're here to give you that info. So of course, Walt Disney World and the Universal Orlando Resort are both major vacation destinations here in this area, and they really are in the same neighborhood. But they're not necessarily as close or convenient to visit if you're already at one and thinking about going to the other as you might think. Now, to be perfectly clear, this does not mean that you can't easily make the trek between both. You absolutely can, but again, there are some things that you need to know, and I want to breeze through some of them with you today. So first and foremost, like we say all the time, when we're talking about visiting a major vacation destination, we're talking about understanding that traveling around can be a bit of a different situation than you might be expecting. You know, oftentimes when we're planning, we're figuring out the route, you know, navigating between point A and point B, we look at things like the number of miles between those two places, but that's not necessarily a good plan when you're visiting a vacation destination or a tourist hub like Central Florida. Things like traffic can really distort that travel time and definitely be different than what you might be familiar with wherever it is you live. This is one of the reasons that I always recommend, whether you're thinking about staying off property or going off property for one reason or another, or in this case, visiting Universal or Walt Disney World when you're staying at the opposite place, to pull up your favorite navigation app, whether that's Google Maps, Apple Maps, pop in the destination where you're starting and where you're going, and from there, see what that looks like. Not only once, not only when it's convenient for you to look that up, but also at different times during the day. You know, another thing that's so important to keep in mind when you're driving around, navigating around these tourist-heavy areas is that the time of day and time of year plays a huge role in how long it'll take you to get from one point to the next. And Universal and Walt Disney World, that's no exception. There are times where, especially if I'm leaving early in the morning or if I'm visiting during a less busy time of the year, it can take me about 15 minutes to get to Universal from Walt Disney World. But there are also other times of day and other times of the year that it can take up to an hour. It's also really important to keep this in mind during the planning process because, you know, as you're working out your days, your schedule, your itinerary, it's important to understand that there may be consequences for starting your day a little bit later if you're going to be making your way from one of these resorts to the next that you might not necessarily have to deal with if you're staying within Walt Disney World or within Universal, for example. I know I tell you guys all the time that arriving early is the way to go, and that's true for Universal as much as it is for the Walt Disney World Resort, but it's never more true than when we talk about making your way from one resort to the other. Even if you're not a morning person, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like the best way to start your day, it might be the best way to start your day based on what you've got going on, where you're staying, what your circumstances are. So make sure that you take some time to figure that out. Again, look it up, find out what the route looks like if you leave at 7 a.m. or if you leave at 10 a.m. Also, take this into consideration if you're thinking about making evening plans at the resort that you're staying at. You know, maybe you think you might be able to get back in time for that 8 o'clock dining reservation, but it might not necessarily work out like you intend. So make sure that you're poking all of those things into your phone, getting a better idea of what to expect and planning accordingly. Now, while we're talking about travel time, it's also important to understand that the traffic can be rough. And I'm not just talking about how much traffic there is, but how stressful it can be to drive that stretch of road between between Walt Disney World and Universal. Now I know there are a lot of you who are going to say that's just the way it is, and that's very true, but I bring this up because I know there are a lot of you out there who might be making this trek for the first time. You're thinking, I'll just rent a car, it's not that big a deal, and that might not necessarily be the best case scenario based on your family. Mainly, I'm talking about those of you who have timid drivers or those of you who just aren't comfortable driving in unfamiliar places. While I totally understand the appeal of just white knuckling it for this portion of your vacation, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, is that really what we want to do? Is that going to ruin my mood? Is that going to ruin my husband, my wife, my family member's mood for the rest of the trip? And is it going to ruin that time that you're spending at Universal or Walt Disney World because you already were so high stress trying to get there in the first place? There are some people out there who this is just going to be the thing that just ruins it for them. And I think it's really important to understand that going in. And I think it's also important to understand something that I've mentioned before in the past as well. Your family is your family, even here at Universal, even at Walt Disney World. So if they don't handle stressful driving situations well at home, there's no reason to believe that they're going to be able to do it well here, especially if maybe you're driving a car that's unfamiliar to you and that makes you uncomfortable on these roads where traffic can be crazy and that makes you uncomfortable. So it's really just please don't put yourself in a position that you're not necessarily comfortable with. I'm not saying don't go to the other resort. We're going to talk about some other options that are available to you here in a second, but I do think that it's important to just understand what you're getting yourself into, which of course is why we're having this conversation in the first place. Okay, so that having been said, let's talk about how to get between the two places. Of course, as I kind of already mentioned, you can just drive yourself. Whether you are driving your own car because you have your own car with you, you can also go ahead and rent a car. There are a lot of different options when it comes to renting a car. I can tell you from experience, you can rent a car very easily right from the Walt Disney World Resort. They do have the car care center, which isn't going to be the right option for everybody, but if you want it for just a day or two and you want to be able to easily get back and forth when picking up and dropping that car off, this might be an option you want to take a look into. Now, I can't speak for what the situation is here at Universal Orlando, but I can tell you that I will look more into it, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. I'll give you some options that might be available to you in the future. Also, if you have any experience, as always, share it in a comment down below. Of course, you also have the option, if you happen to be flying in, of picking up a rental car right at the airport. We've done that before. Very convenient, but again, make sure that you're crunching numbers because that may or may not fit within your budget and may or may not be worth it if you're going to be spending most of your time at just one place and only using that car for one day to get back and forth. Now, if driving isn't for you, you don't want to do it, it's going to stress you out, you can also go the route of getting a ride share. There are a number of ride share services out there. Most are familiar with Uber and Lyft. I do think that if this is something you're considering, it's worth taking the time to download the app and pop the information in so you get an idea of what to expect in terms of cost. Also, I do think it's worth taking the time to check multiple times a day, the times that you think you'll be traveling, and understand that the price may fluctuate, especially during busy times of the year or busy times of the day. So planning a little bit extra into your rideshare budget isn't a bad idea. Of course, having a little cushion on your budget, no matter what we're talking about, is always a good plan. Now, I have taken ride shares before, so has Russ. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about going this route is understanding that the size of your family might impact how this all works out for you, and it's certainly going to impact how much you're going to have to pay. It's much easier if it's just, you and someone else. A little bit more complicated if we're talking about moving an entire family, or multiple families, I suppose you could say. Mom, dad, a couple kids, grandma and grandpa. But again, that's just another reason to make sure you're crunching the numbers. It's also important to factor in the tip when you're doing that research and understand that you are going to have to pay for that return trip as well. So don't forget to add that into your budget. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is accommodations. This is one of those things that people always bring up every time we have a conversation about visiting both places. A lot of people always say, I want to find a good middle ground hotel, but that's not going to necessarily be a good option for everybody. It might honestly not even be a good option at all. Now, I have been spending a lot of time trying to find a perfect middle ground hotel that meets all of my needs and just sits in a good location that is going to cut down the amount of time it takes me to get to both Walt Disney World and Universal. And unfortunately, I haven't found one yet, which is why we haven't done any reviews of any middle ground hotels. Now, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion, but I feel like no matter where you stay, the middle is never convenient. I think this is probably just because of traffic. I find that every time I've looked into this place or that, it's going to take you just as long to get to Walt Disney World or Universal from that middle point as it would to get from Walt Disney World to Universal, you know, so I feel like, is it worth the price? And then of course, if you're going to be staying somewhere off property in between the two places, you're definitely going to have to factor in the cost of a rental car if you're not bringing your own car with you. That's just kind of my 2 cents. Of course, I know a lot of you might have experience with these middle ground hotels, so if you do and you have a recommendation, pop it in the comments down below. For me, I actually kind of feel like it's worth staying on property at both places and just making one trip from one place to the next when you're transitioning over. And the reason I feel this way is because it's just a little bit easier. It can definitely be more affordable, and there are some great perks that you can take advantage of if you go this route. Of course, depending on where you're staying and all of that good stuff. Staying at the Walt Disney World Resort, for example, during that portion of your vacation gives you access to early theme park entry. If you're staying at a deluxe resort, you have access to extended evening hours, of course, on select nights at select parks. You also have some other little perks that people overlook that I think are really helpful. So things like being able to make dining reservations for the duration of your stay, or make your lightning lane selections before everyone else, which might be really beneficial to you, especially if you're doing just a short stay. On the flip side, Universal has some great perks for staying at some of their resorts as well, including Express Pass when you stay at certain categories of resort, which is great. That's a huge perk. So for me, on top of the convenience factor and not having to go back and forth and deal with traffic more than just once, if we're being real, I think that this would be the best route to go, but that's just my personal opinion. Of course, I'd love to hear what you have to say in a comment down below. Also, as a side note, I have been asking you guys where you want us to stay in 2025, and you guys had a lot of suggestions for here at Universal Orlando. We are absolutely going to add that to our calendar. I haven't booked anything yet, but it's going to happen. Now, we've talked about pretty much everything there is to talk about, you know, the importance of just considering the travel time between two places, understanding what you're getting yourself into if you're going to be behind the wheel, and what your options are when it comes to hotels. I think we've covered it all, but of course I'm sure I missed something, so if there's anything that you think I should have added to the discussion, let me know in a comment down below. But all right, I think it's time to get going and enjoy the rest of our day. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, wherever it is you are. Thanks so much, by the way, for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing what all you guys have to say. Until next time, bye.